Israel says it's planning to expand its military operations in southern Gaza. But they're now dealing with a legal battle away from the fighting. A prosecutor with the International Criminal Court is seeking warrants over war crimes against Hamas leaders, as well as top Israeli officials, including Benjamin Netanyahu. Briar Stewart reports.
In northern Gaza, rescuers recover more bodies from the ruins of apartment blocks. The latest victims in a war which Gaza health officials say has already killed more than 35,000. Now the chief prosecutor for the International Criminal Court says what's happening in Gaza includes evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Intentionally causing death, starvation, injury, and suffering to the civilian population, including so very many women and children, are criminal means to achieve military and political goals.
The prosecutor is seeking arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister Yoav Gallant, who recently met with U.S. officials to say Israel is committed to expanding its campaign in Rafah, where UN officials have warned a major offensive could worsen the humanitarian crisis. Arrest warrants are also being sought for 3 Hamas leaders, including Yahya Sinwar, the head of the group in Gaza. On October 7th, Hamas militants killed about 1,200 in Israel and took more than 250 hostage. The prosecutor believes during that attack and in the months afterwards, there's evidence Hamas committed crimes against humanity, including sexual violence and torture. Both sides have condemned the accusations.
It's a moral outrage of historic proportions.
The U.S. is Israel's biggest ally, and neither country is a signatory to the International Criminal Court.
There should be no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. None.
It's been a long time coming.
This professor of international law says if both sides are charged, it may complicate ceasefire negotiations, but it could also dial up the pressure.
Everyone has pleaded with Israel not to do what they're doing, and they persist. Perhaps this will be this will tip things in the other direction.
It's now up to a panel of judges to decide whether to issue these warrants. If it does, Netanyahu would be the first leader from a Western-style democracy to face these charges. And it means that he would be unable to travel to the more than 120 countries that have signed on to the International Criminal Court, because the authorities there would be compelled to arrest him. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
All right, joining us now is Mark Kersten. He is an assistant professor of criminology and criminal justice at the University of the Fraser Valley, specializing in the investigation and prosecution of international crimes. He's joining us tonight from Vancouver. Okay, so Mark, I would love to start by getting your reaction to all of this. What do you make of this move by the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court?
Yeah, so first thought is it's about time. You know, for many years, not just since October 7th, but well before that, we've heard from victims and survivors trying to convince the world, trying to convince Western states, trying to convince United Nations bodies, trying to convince the International Criminal Court that they have experienced mass atrocities on both the Israeli and the Palestinian side. And finally that happened. I wish it had happened before, but finally at least we can say that it happened today. And I think it's a potential real game changer for a situation that has really been starved of justice and accountability for many, many years.
Let's talk a little bit about process here and what needs to happen now. This has to pass a panel of 3 judges. What bar do prosecutors need to meet before warrants are issued?
Yeah, so as you said, what's happened today is the ICC prosecutor has basically said that he is seeking arrest warrants against 2 Israeli officials and 3 Hamas leaders. And what he has to do is he has to get the approval of those 3 judges. And the legal threshold to do that is basically that he has to show that there are reasonable grounds to believe that those individuals committed the crimes that he is alleging they committed. It's a rather low threshold. In my years studying the ICC, I can't recall a single time where judges have not approved that. This is a complex case. It's obviously a politically sensitive case. So in addition to just the prosecutor asking for this, he actually brought together a whole panel of experts of international law, people including Amal Clooney, and many, many others, are basically a dream team of international lawyers to make sure that he was as prepared as possible when he did, as he did today, ask the judges for those arrest warrants to be issued.
How unusual is it to seek warrants on both sides of a war?
Yeah, so the ICC has a bit of a mixed record on this. In some instances, it has only issued arrest warrants on one side of a war. It did that in Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in other instances like Kenya, which wasn't a war but had serious mass atrocities committed, the ICC issued warrants and summonses for both sides of the conflict there. What's important to note is, I think, if you ask any proponent of international criminal law or basic standards of international law, what they have asked for and pleaded for is more of the targeting of both sides when it comes to their atrocities, not to kind of engage in what we call as victor's justice or just siding with one side or the other, but really following the evidence. And in times of war, as we've seen in this conflict, both sides have committed mass atrocities. And I understand that many people will draw the point, the United States has drawn the point, some Canadian MPs have said this, that there is no equivalency between Hamas and Israel. And I don't think that's what the ICC prosecutor is doing. The ICC prosecutor is going where the evidence leads, listening to victims and survivors, interviewing medical health professionals, interviewing aid workers who have come under attack, interviewing civilians, taking that evidence and coming to legal conclusions, which is exactly the way that international law should work. And we can't hold out this idea that, you know, there can't be equivalency when that kind of claim is often just used to say there shouldn't be any accountability for one side. It should only go for the other side. I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think it's fair. And it's certainly not in line with the basic rules of international law.
All right, Mark, appreciate this. We will chat with you again on this issue very soon, I'm sure. That is Mark Kersten. He is an assistant professor of criminology and criminal justice at the University of the Fraser Valley.